I'm going to verify the case details first, then I'll start the narration directly in the requested voice. Since this is a real cold case, I want the names, dates, and places to stay accurate. The Oakland County Child Files case sits tonight under the soft weight of an old folder, and we follow the long Oakland County Child Killer investigation through snow, paper, memory, and time. Settle in and let the pace be slow, because this file has waited for years. You can imagine the room before the story begins. A small lamp bends its light over a desk. The paper smells faintly of dust and winter air, the kind that clings to coats after someone has walked in from a dark parking lot. Somewhere in the file, the name Oakland County Child Killer appears again, typed in plain letters, as if plain letters could ever hold the whole sorrow of it. We are not here to hurry through it. We are here to sit beside the case as patient detectives once did, turning one page, then another, while the suburbs north of Detroit settle into the quiet shape they had in the winter of 1976. You rest your hand near the edge of the folder, and the cardboard feels worn where many other hands have lifted it before yours. Oakland County, Michigan, was a place of ordinary roots then. Children walked to stores, parents drove familiar streets. Snow gathered along curbs in gray ridges, and porch lights came on early during the short winter afternoons. You can hear the muffled sound of tires on cold pavement and the soft squeak of boots at a doorway. The first confirmed name in the file is Mark Stebbins. He was 12 years old, from Ferndale, and he disappeared on the 15th of February, 1976. The page that holds his name feels heavier than it should. It is only paper, but you know how paper changes when it carries a family's waiting. Mark had been at an American Legion hall with his mother and brother. That detail stays small and human. A community hall, the dull shine of a floor, the smell of coffee, winter coats, and cigarette smoke lingering in the corners of the 1970s. You can almost hear chairs being moved, the scrape of metal legs against tile, while ordinary minutes pass without warning. When Mark did not return, the first work was not grand or cinematic. It was calling, asking, walking, checking. It was neighbors opening doors under porch lights. It was officers writing down times, clothing, last known places, and possible sightings. You turn that page slowly, because in any missing child file, the first hours are always full of small hopes. At that time, investigators had fewer tools than we expect now. No instant digital maps, no phone location data, no neighborhood camera systems quietly saving video through the night. What they had were notebooks, patrol cars, radios, shoe leather, and the steady practice of asking the same question in many careful ways. And so the search widened. Ferndale streets gave way to other streets. Tips came in, some thin as breath on glass, some shaped by fear, some offered because people truly wanted to help. You can picture a detective leaning over a desk, the receiver warm against his ear, pencil moving as someone describes a car, a man, a time, a feeling. Days passed, and the case changed from urgent searching into something colder. Mark was found in Southfield, and the file grew quieter around that fact. We do not need to linger on what happened to him. It is enough to say that a child had been taken, a family had been left with an absence, and investigators now understood they were holding something deeply serious. The first file never stays alone for long in a case like this. It begins as one folder, one photograph, one map, with a few careful marks. Then more paper gathers around it, lab notes, interview summaries, search logs. The edges soften, the staples bend. You begin to feel how a case becomes physical, how grief and procedure share the same drawer. For many months, the Oakland County Child Killer investigation had one confirmed child at its center. Detectives followed what they could. They compared descriptions. They looked at known offenders. They asked whether someone had seen Mark speak with anyone, whether a car had paused, whether an adult had seemed out of place near a child's path. You and I can pause with that kind of work. It is not dramatic work. It is patient work, and sometimes it feels like listening to a room after everyone has left. A detective might return to the same witness statement in the evening, when the office is quieter, and notice only that the statement has not changed. There is a particular loneliness in an early cold case. Not abandonment, but stillness. Leads cool, People move, memories blur at the edges. A witness who was once certain becomes less certain. A vehicle description loses its color. A date that seemed fixed begins to wobble, like a reflection in a dark window, and yet the file remains. Mark Stebbins remains. His name appears again in the later paperwork because the Oakland County Child Killer case would not stay a single case. It would become a pattern investigators feared, then studied, then carried for decades, long after the first winter had turned to spring. But another winter came, and the next page in the folder brings us to Royal Oak, where the snow on lawns and the quiet behind windows gave the old worry a new shape. Jill Robinson was 12 years old. She lived in Royal Oak, and she left home on the 22nd of December 1976, after an ordinary family disagreement. You sit with that sentence for a while, because there is nothing unusual about a child's upset, nothing unusual about a winter evening, nothing that should become permanent. The file tells you she packed a backpack. That small detail has its own ache. A backpack is not a symbol when you first see it. It is fabric, straps, a zipper sound, maybe school things inside, maybe personal things chosen in haste. You can imagine the weight of it against a shoulder, the cold air at the door, the way a house sounds after someone leaves. Royal Oak in late December would have been full of holiday light. Storefronts glowed. Traffic moved in patient lines. Houses held the smell of dinner, pine, damp wool, and radiator heat. You read the line again, and you feel how ordinary places become difficult in a case file, because the ordinary details are the ones families remember most. At first, Jill's disappearance may have seemed different from Mark's. She had left after an argument. That mattered to investigators. Context mattered. You do not force one file onto another too quickly, because careful detective work means letting each fact keep its own shape before you ask whether it belongs beside another. Still, people searched. Police took information. Family waited. Friends were asked what they knew. The season pressed around everyone. December has a sound of its own in Michigan. A soft closing sound with wind at windows and tires moving over salted roads. In the file, the pages would have smelled of ink, carbon paper, and the faint metallic scent of office heat. Jill was found several days later, and again, we do not need to make the details sharp. We can keep our attention where this story belongs, on the patient work that followed, and on the human difficulty of trying to understand the pattern without letting fear write the answer too quickly. Her case was not the same as Mark's in every detail, and that difference mattered. Investigators were now looking at 2 children from Oakland County, 2 families, 2 sets of last movements, and 2 recoveries that left more questions than answers. You can imagine the map on the wall. Ferndale, Royal Oak, Southfield, other points marked in pencil or pin. The county begins to look different when viewed through a detective's careful worry. The problem with patterns is that they ask for humility. A pattern can be real, or it can be the mind trying to make order from pain. You and I can sit beside the detectives here, not judging them from the future, but noticing what they had. They had interviews. They had physical evidence. They had public concern. They had time moving against memory. The 1970s gave investigators some strong tools, but not the tools later generations would take for granted. They could preserve evidence. They could compare fibers, hairs, soil, and impressions. They could examine vehicles and clothing. But they could not yet ask DNA to speak in the way it would speak decades later, when old envelopes and sealed evidence bags became newly important. So the work stayed slow. Officers checked tips. Detectives revisited places. Parents across Oakland County held children closer. You can hear the low murmur of a police office late at night, phones ringing too often, typewriters tapping reports into existence, and tired voices repeating names with care because names deserved care. Public pressure grew, as it always does when a community feels unsafe and unanswered. Newspapers printed updates. Television stations carried the story. Rumors moved from kitchen tables to school hallways to office break rooms. Some rumors were born from fear, some from sincere attempts to help. All of them had to be handled, weighed, and, when needed, set aside. That is one reason the case began to strain under its own size. An investigation can become so large that every new lead adds both possibility and fog. You open one drawer, and there is another drawer behind it. You write down one plate number, and 10 more arrive. The work continues, but the path does not necessarily grow clearer. In the Jill Robinson section of the Oakland County Child Killer file, you feel that widening field. Her disappearance had its own story, but it also began to sit near marks in the minds of investigators and citizens. The county was no longer asking whether one terrible event had occurred. It was beginning to ask whether someone was moving through familiar streets unseen. Still, the file does not shout. It never needs to. The paper waits, the photographs remain still, the reports hold their dates and places in the same quiet font. You turn the page, and the lamp on your desk catches a crease where someone folded a copy long ago. Across the county, just after the new year, one more ordinary errand would enter the file, and the investigation would become broader, heavier, and harder to set down. Christine Mihalich was 10 years old, from Berkeley, and she disappeared on the 2nd of January, 1977. In the Oakland County Child Killer investigation, her page begins with a simple errand. She had gone to a convenience store on 12 Mile Road near Oakshire to buy a magazine. You can feel the smallness of that errand in your hand. A magazine is light. A child might carry it rolled slightly or flat against a coat. The store would have had bright indoor lighting, shelves of candy, a counter, the smell of paper, tobacco, floor cleaner, and cold air drifting in whenever the door opened. Outside, winter would have pressed against the windows, turning the glass dark before evening felt fully settled. You sit with that detail, because it matters. A child went somewhere familiar, a nearby store, a routine place. In cold cases, routine is often what hurts the most, because it reminds us that danger is not the only thing in the world. Most errands end safely. Most streets remain just streets. Most children come home. When Christine did not, the case took on another weight. Searchers looked through neighborhoods. Officers gathered statements. People tried to remember whether they had seen a car waiting, a person watching, anything slightly wrong in the familiar rhythm of that day. You can almost hear the questions asked gently at first, then repeated because repetition is part of the work. By then, the earlier files were not far from anyone's mind. Mark Stebbins, Joe Robinson. Now Christine Mihalich. 3 children from Oakland County, each with a different last known place, each leaving behind a family and a widening circle of concern. Investigators had to consider connection, but connection had to be proven, not merely feared. This is where the patient detective work becomes both necessary and difficult. You compare timelines, you compare geography, you compare what was known publicly with what only investigators knew. You ask whether the same person could have moved in these spaces. You ask whether more than one person might be involved. You ask, and then you wait for facts to answer. Waiting is not passive in a case file. Waiting means sending evidence to a lab and checking again. It means following a tip that leads nowhere, then documenting it fully because nowhere still matters. It means listening to a witness who is frightened or uncertain, and leaving enough space for memory to arrive without being pushed into shape. Christine was found later in January, and the quiet in the file deepens there. Again, we stay with care. We do not turn a child's death into spectacle. We note what investigators had to note, and we keep our attention on the unanswered questions that gathered around the evidence, the timeline, and the person or people responsible. The community response grew intense. Oakland County parents changed habits. Children who had once walked alone were driven. Stores and sidewalks seemed different. Schools carried a low hum of worry. You can imagine the sound of a kitchen phone ringing in a house where every family was listening more closely than before, hoping the call was ordinary. The task force formed around this widening investigation became one of the largest of its kind at that time. That fact can sound official and clean, but inside it were rooms full of people, boxes full of paper, and human beings trying to sort urgency from noise. You can picture desks crowded with reports, coffee cooling in paper cups, ashtrays filling, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A large task force can gather more information, but it can also inherit more confusion. Tips arrived in great numbers. Some people reported suspicious cars, some reported strangers, some repeated something they had heard from someone else. Every piece had to be touched, labeled, and considered. Every wrong path cost time, and every ignored path carried risk. You and I, sitting with the file years later, can see how a case goes cold, not from one failure, but from many small frictions. Evidence may be limited, witnesses may be uncertain, jurisdictions may overlap, records may be duplicated, misplaced, or written in different formats. A lead may seem promising in March, then thin by May, then sit quietly in a box for years. The Oakland County Child Killer case became a landscape of these frictions. Ferndale, Royal Oak, Berkeley, Birmingham, Southfield, Livonia, and other names appear in the broader story like towns on a winter map. Each place had its own officers, its own memories, its own fragments. The task was to make those fragments speak to each other. Christine's file adds another kind of patience. Her disappearance lasted longer than the others before she was found, and that time created its own set of questions. Where had she been kept? Who had seen something and not understood it? Which details belonged to the case and which belonged only to fear? The questions waited in the margins. There is an old archive feeling to these questions. You can smell dust when a box is opened after years. You can feel the chill of a basement record room. You can hear the soft rasp of cardboard against metal shelving. The file does not solve itself. It only offers what it has and asks the next person to look again. But the next page does not let the investigation rest, because in March, a boy in Birmingham left home for candy, and the county listened for him with everything it had. Timothy King was 11 years old, from Birmingham, and he disappeared on the 16th of March, 1977. In the Oakland County Child Killer file, his story begins with a few coins and a simple request. He borrowed money from his older sister and went out to buy candy at a drugstore near Maple Road. You can hold that detail gently. A child with change in his pocket, a skateboard, a nearby store, evening light thinning over the neighborhood. The air still cold enough for winter to remain in the body, even as March promised that spring might be somewhere beyond the bare trees and damp streets. By the time Timothy disappeared, Oakland County was already living inside the case. Parents were alert. Police were under immense pressure. Newspapers were watching. Residents were calling in anything that seemed out of place. You can imagine a detective hearing the report and feeling the old file open in his mind before anyone physically pulled it from a drawer. Timothy's family did something that remains one of the most remembered details in the case. His mother, Marion King, made a public plea asking that her son be allowed to come home, and she mentioned his favorite meal, fried chicken. That detail has often been repeated, but we can say it softly here because it was not a hook. It was a mother speaking to whoever might hear her. In a patient retelling, that moment deserves quiet. A family trying to reach a child through television and print. A community listening. The smell of a kitchen meal becoming part of a public appeal. You can feel how private love sometimes has to step into public light during an investigation, not because it wants attention, but because it is searching for a way through. Timothy was found days later in Livonia, and the investigation reached its most intense point. Again, we do not need harsh detail. We only need to understand what the detectives understood. 4 children were now confirmed in the same broad Oakland County Child Killer investigation. 4 families waited for answers that did not come. The task force had grown enormous. Thousands of tips would be handled over time. Investigators looked at vehicles, suspects, locations, known offenders, and possible links to other cases. You can hear the office phones ringing through long shifts, one call after another. The bell sharp at first, and then strangely ordinary after too many hours. The physical evidence mattered deeply, but its meaning was not always clear. Hairs, fibers, clothing, locations, witness descriptions, and timing all had to be weighed. Some evidence suggested links between cases. Some details did not align neatly. You and I can feel the difficulty there, because real investigations rarely arrange themselves into tidy rows. The question of a vehicle became part of the case's long memory. Witnesses reported cars, including descriptions that have been discussed for decades. In old investigations, a car can become a moving shadow across many statements: color, model, year, condition, license plate fragments, and the confidence of the witness all become separate problems. You turn a page and see how uncertain certainty can be. A witness may believe they saw something clearly. Another may remember a similar car differently. Snow, darkness, distance, passing headlights, and fear all affect memory. Detectives must honor what people offer, while still asking whether the offering can bear the weight placed on it. The Oakland County Child Killer case went cold, partly because it grew too wide for its own moment. That does not mean people stopped working. It means the number of possible directions became vast, while the proof needed to move forward remained narrow. A name is not enough. A suspicion is not enough. Even a strong feeling must wait outside the courtroom, unless evidence can carry it in. This is one of the hardest truths in old files. Families may know the shape of a possibility, detectives may feel a lead has gravity, reporters may uncover troubling connections. But the legal system asks for more than gravity. It asks for proof that can survive careful challenge, and in a decades-old case, proof can be fragile. By the time Timothy King's file joined Mark's, Jill's, and Christine's, the investigation had become both urgent and crowded. You can picture corkboards, maps, typed summaries, and manila folders stacked beside metal desks. You can smell stale coffee, wet wool coats, paper dust, and cigarette smoke in a room where nobody wanted to go home early, and still, the person responsible was not identified in a way that brought the case to court. The trail did not vanish all at once. It thinned. Leads were checked and closed. Suspects were examined and released from focus. Evidence waited for better science. Time moved on, not because anyone invited it to, but because time always does. Years later, when the boxes came down from the shelves again, the case had changed, because the world around the evidence had changed, and old hairs, old notes, and old names could be read in new ways. Years later, when the boxes came down from the shelves again, the case had changed, because the world around the evidence had changed, and old hairs, old notes, and old names could be read in new ways. You can picture the Oakland County Child Killer file on a new desk now, under newer fluorescent lights, with the same aging paper and a different kind of hope resting beside it. The folders would not have looked dramatic. They would have looked tired, corners softened, labels fading, pages held by clips that had left small rust-colored marks. You might lift one report and feel the thin drag of carbon copies against your fingertips, while somewhere in the room a copier hums, a keyboard clicks, and a cold case detective reads what another detective typed before computers had become ordinary. By then, forensic science had learned to listen more closely. Evidence that once could only be grouped by appearance could sometimes be tested in ways earlier investigators could not imagine. A hair was no longer only a hair under glass. It might carry a line of inheritance. It might narrow a field. It might tell you who could not be the source, even when it could not name who was. This is one reason the Oakland County Child Files case remained active in memory, even when it seemed still on paper. The case had not disappeared. It had been waiting for tools that did not yet exist, and for people willing to return to the shelves with patience instead of certainty. You can imagine that return as a quiet act, almost like opening a window in a room that had been closed for years. But better science does not always mean an easy answer. Old evidence has its own weather. It may have been handled in ways that were standard at the time, but imperfect by later standards. It may have moved through several agencies, several storage rooms, several generations of labels. You sit with that reality gently, because it explains so much of why an old case can remain unresolved, even after new testing begins. Chain of custody is a phrase that sounds dry until you place it in a human room. It means who touched the evidence, when, why, and how it was sealed again. It means inked initials, dates written in small spaces, envelopes folded and taped, boxes placed on shelves, and shelves moved from one building to another. In a case this old, every small movement matters. The Oakland County Child Killer investigation had been born in urgency. People were trying to find children, protect families, answer phones, search neighborhoods, and respond to a county that was afraid. You and I can understand that the first priority was not future laboratory perfection. It was immediate care, immediate searching, immediate response, and the daily pressure of doing everything possible with what the moment allowed. So when later investigators returned, they inherited both the dedication and the limits of the earlier work. They inherited reports written by tired officers at midnight. They inherited evidence gathered before DNA became a courtroom word. They inherited tips so numerous they became a second case inside the first, and they inherited the quiet obligation to treat all of it with respect. There is a certain sound to cold case work. It is not the siren sound people imagine. It is the soft slide of a box across a table. It is a chair rolling back from a desk. It is the low voice of someone reading a name aloud to confirm the spelling. You hear it as you sit with the Oakland County Child Files case, page by page, not rushing the silence between entries. When new testing was attempted, it could clarify some questions and complicate others. A result might exclude a suspect who had seemed important. Another result might suggest a possible connection, but not enough to support charges. A partial profile might become a thread, and then the thread might lead only to another waiting room. You learn after enough old files that science can be powerful and still incomplete. The public often wants a single locked door and one key. Investigations are rarely so kind. In this case, there were many doors. Some led to known offenders, some led to places where children might have been held. Some led to names that appeared in other cases, other counties, other files. You take them one at a time, because taking them all at once turns the page into fog. The Oakland County Child Killer case also became difficult because of the number of suspects who passed through it. Some were investigated early, some were reconsidered later. Some were named by witnesses, others by circumstance, and others by their own troubling histories. A careful narrator must move through those names softly, because suspicion is not proof, and old accusations can cast long shadows. One name that has been discussed publicly over the years is Christopher Bush. You may find his name in later reporting in family advocacy, and in the work of investigators who revisited the case long after the first task force closed. He was never charged in the Oakland County Child Killer case, and he died in 1978. That combination of facts leaves a file with no simple place to rest. In a cold case, a deceased suspect can create a particular kind of stillness. There can be no interview that lasts into the afternoon, no trial testimony, no final questioning across a table with a recorder running quietly nearby. If the evidence is not enough, the person becomes not an answer, but a question that cannot respond. You feel that silence in the paper. The Bush lead, like other leads, has been examined and debated. Some believed it deserved more weight. Others pointed to gaps, uncertainty, or evidence that did not complete the bridge. You and I do not need to force the file into certainty. We can sit with the more honest shape of it, which is that a lead can be serious, troubling, and still not legally sufficient. That is part of why the case went cold, not because nobody cared. The phrase "went cold" can sound like a door closing, but often it means something more subtle. It means investigators kept reaching the edge of what could be proved. It means the file held possibilities, but the possibilities did not harden into a prosecutable case. It means patience outlived the first momentum. Another name, Arch Sloan, entered later public discussion because of forensic testing and investigative review. He was a convicted offender, and at one point some evidence drew attention toward him, though he was not charged as the Oakland County Child Killer. You hold that carefully too. A name in a file is not the same as a solved case, and the difference matters. In old investigations, DNA can point in a direction without reaching a destination. Mitochondrial testing, for example, can be useful, but it often cannot identify one person with the precision people expect from modern crime shows. It can include a maternal line. It can exclude others. It can narrow and guide. But sometimes it cannot stand alone beneath the weight of a courtroom. You can imagine an investigator reading a lab report with mixed feelings. The paper is crisp, the language is careful, the result matters. And yet, as the fluorescent lights make a pale reflection on the desk, the investigator knows the report is not the whole road. It is a marker beside the road, useful, important, and still surrounded by miles of uncertainty. For families, that uncertainty can be painful in a way no file can measure. A possible suspect may bring a moment of breath. Then the legal threshold remains unmet, and the breath catches again. You and I can feel the patience required there, not the patience of indifference, but the patience of people who have learned that answers cannot be made true by needing them. The Oakland County Child Files case also carried the burden of public memory. Over decades, documentaries, newspaper stories, books, interviews, and online discussions kept returning to the same winter roads. That attention helped preserve interest, but it also created layers. Rumor and fact can lie beside each other in public memory until careful readers must separate them with slow hands. You might sit at your desk with two piles. In one pile, confirmed reports. In another, claims that need checking. A third pile forms almost by itself, full of things people said with conviction but without support. The paper edges make a dry whisper as you move them. Outside, night presses against the window, and the file remains patient. The original task force had to manage something similar, though without the internet's later echo. They received thousands of tips. Each tip had to be logged. Some had to be assigned, some led to interviews, searches, comparisons, or surveillance. Most did not solve the case. That does not make them useless. It means the work was wide, heavy, and often unrewarded. A tip line can become its own atmosphere. The ring of the phone, the intake form, the attempt to keep a caller calm, the careful question about dates, places, names, and vehicles. You can hear a detective saying, "Slow down, let's start at the beginning," while a pencil moves across a form and another call waits on another line. Some callers were trying to help. Some were confused. Some may have wanted attention. Some may have remembered something real but placed it in the wrong week, the wrong town, or the wrong winter. Human memory is not a filing cabinet. It is more like a room with shifting light, and detectives have to walk through it without knocking things over. In the Oakland County Child Killer investigation, witness memory was both essential and fragile. A car seen near a drugstore might matter. A man noticed near a street might matter. A child speaking with someone might matter. But darkness, snow, ordinary traffic, and the passage of time all softened the edges. You can feel how hard it is to build certainty from glances. That fragility becomes worse when a case becomes famous. Once a community knows what details investigators are seeking, memories can become contaminated without anyone meaning harm. A person may remember a car more clearly after seeing a similar description in the newspaper. Another may connect an old unease to a case because the case has become the county's shared language of fear. This is not a criticism of witnesses. It is a tender recognition of being human. We remember through feeling, through conversation, through repetition, and through what we later learn. Detectives know this, and the best ones handle it carefully. They do not dismiss memory, but they do not let memory carry more weight than it can bear. You turn another page and see how geography complicated the case. Oakland County is not one small village with a single road in and out. It is a wide suburban area with many municipalities, connected by roads, shopping centers, schools, churches, and family routines. The children came from different communities. They were found in other places. Jurisdiction became part of the puzzle. Jurisdiction can sound bureaucratic, but on the ground it means real people in different departments sharing pieces of a crisis. Ferndale, Royal Oak, Berkeley, Birmingham, Southfield, Livonia, county officials, state police, and federal help all existed in relation to the investigation. Each agency had habits, records, radios, priorities, and command structures. Coordination mattered, and coordination is work. You can imagine a meeting room with maps taped to walls. Men and women in coats come and go. Someone brings in a fresh stack of reports. Someone else updates a list of vehicles. The air smells of paper, coffee, damp wool, and old building heat. Nobody in that room wants the case to drift. But large systems drift unless people keep pulling them back into order. The Oakland County Child Files case went cold, in part because order was so difficult to preserve across scale. Not impossible, but difficult. The number of leads, the number of agencies, the number of possible offenders, and the speed at which fear moved through the community all created pressure. Under pressure, files multiply. Under pressure, communication can fray. Even so, the investigation did not simply collapse. It continued through official work, family pressure, private inquiry, and later cold case review. You can see that persistence as one of the most human parts of the story. The case was not solved, but it was not forgotten. There is a difference, and the difference lives in every box that someone refused to throw away. At certain points, family members became investigators in their own right. They asked for records. They read reports. They pressed officials. They remembered names, dates, and contradictions. For a family, the file is not an object. It is a room they never chose to enter, but one they keep returning to because love has no statute of limitations. You can picture a family member at a kitchen table long after the first winter with photocopied pages spread beneath a lamp. The paper is cooler than the hand resting on it. The house is quiet. A refrigerator hums in the next room. The person reads not for curiosity, but because the child's name is there, and because someone must keep looking. That kind of persistence shapes cold cases. Official investigators change. Detectives retire. Prosecutors move on. Evidence rooms relocate. But families often remain the longest-serving witnesses to the absence. They remember what was promised. They remember what was missed. They remember the tone of a phone call, the wording of a report, the way a door closed after an interview. In the Oakland County Child Killer case, families and advocates helped keep public attention alive. That attention sometimes made officials uncomfortable, as attention often does. It raised questions about old decisions, old suspects, old evidence, and whether every path had been followed with enough care. You and I can hold that complexity without turning it into accusation for its own sake. Cold cases deserve accountability, but they also deserve precision. It is easy, decades later, to see what should have been done with tools that did not exist, or with hindsight that earlier detectives did not have. It is also necessary to ask when mistakes were made. The calm path is not to excuse or condemn too quickly, but to look steadily. There were likely many reasons this file resisted closure. The offender may have been cautious. The children came from ordinary settings where a brief approach could be missed. The scenes connected to recovery did not reveal enough. Evidence was limited. Witness accounts varied. Suspects died, moved, denied, or could not be tied to the facts with enough strength. You read that list not as drama, but as weather. Each condition made visibility worse. One by one, they may not explain everything. Together, they show how a case can move from active emergency to long uncertainty. The Oakland County Child Files case did not become cold in one night. It cooled slowly while people kept touching it, hoping warmth remained. The role of media was another layer. During the original investigation, newspapers and television reports informed the public, which was necessary. They also shaped public attention, which was unavoidable. Information released could bring tips, but too much information could weaken later interviews. Too little could create distrust. Every public statement had to live between those needs. You can imagine a press conference in winter, microphones clustered together, camera lights making faces look pale, officials choosing words carefully while families listen from somewhere nearby or later at home. The room has the smell of wet coats and hot bulbs. Outside, people want reassurance, but the truth is that reassurance cannot be honestly given. The Oakland County Child Killer case entered households through those reports. Parents watched. Children overheard. Teachers noticed changed behavior. Police departments received more calls. The shared fear became part of the evidence environment because fear affects what people report, how they remember, and how quickly suspicions form around strangers. A person sitting in a parked car might become suspicious. A neighbor with an odd schedule might be called in. Someone who looked unfamiliar near a store might be remembered after the fact. Some of those reports may have mattered. Many did not. Detectives had to sort them anyway, because in a case like this, dismissing the wrong small thing can haunt a file forever. This sorting is not glamorous. It is rows and rows of decisions follow up. File, recheck, compare, exclude, hold open. You run your finger down an old log, and see how much human labor hides behind a single line. One call could become 3 interviews. One interview could become a report. One report could sit unread for years until someone sees it again. And sometimes the file changes because someone does see it again. A cold case detective may notice a name that appears in 2 places. A family member may recognize a detail that did not seem important before. A forensic analyst may recommend retesting. You can feel the case breathe slightly when that happens. Not solved, not transformed, but stirred. Still, every stirring needs evidence. The law cannot live on the feeling that a name appears too often. It cannot live on the unease around a suspect. It cannot live on the way a theory seems to gather all the loose threads in one hand. The law needs threads tied, knots tested, and proof that holds when pulled. That legal threshold is one of the quiet reasons the Oakland County Child Files case went cold. It is possible for investigators to know many things and still not know enough. It is possible for a case to point toward darkness without naming its owner. It is possible for truth to exist somewhere beyond the reach of the surviving record. You and I can sit with that without forcing comfort onto it. Some mysteries are not romantic. They are unfinished work. They are boxes that still matter. They are families who learn to live with unanswered questions, are refusing to let those questions become normal. The sleepiness of our telling does not soften the importance. It only keeps the room calm enough to keep reading. As the decades passed, the physical world of the case changed. Buildings were renovated or demolished, roads widened, stores closed, reopened under new names, or became something else entirely. People who were children in 1976 became parents, then grandparents. A witness who once stood at a counter might now remember the counter as a blur of light. You can drive through those places now and feel the difficulty. The geography remains, but it does not remain unchanged. A drugstore corner may no longer look like the photograph. A neighborhood may hold newer houses, different trees, different traffic patterns. The old map and the present road sit over each other imperfectly, like tracing paper that has shifted. That shift affects investigations too. Canvassing a neighborhood decades later is different from canvassing it the next morning. Doors have new owners. Records may be gone. A person who once lived there may have moved across the country or passed away. The weather of memory grows thinner, and yet sometimes, strangely, an old memory survives with surprising clarity. A witness may remember a sound, a car door closing, a coat color, a man's voice, the feel of cold air coming through a store entrance. You learn to respect those fragments, even as you test them. The human mind sometimes keeps what it does not understand at the time, and years later, the stored detail returns when someone asks the right question. The Oakland County Child Killer file contains many such human edges. Parents, siblings, classmates, clerks, officers, reporters, and neighbors all carried pieces of the story. Not all pieces belonged to the solution. Some belonged only to the experience of living near an unanswered case. But even that has value, because a cold case is also a record of how a community endures uncertainty. In the late-night quiet of our imagined desk, you may notice that the case has 2 timelines. One timeline belongs to the children and the winter months when the disappearances occurred. The other belongs to the investigation, which stretches for decades. The first timeline is brief and painful. The second is long, repetitive, and full of people trying again. That second timeline is where patient detective work lives. It lives in retesting. It lives in transcription. It lives in reopening interviews, digitizing records, comparing names across databases, and asking whether an old lead was closed because it was truly resolved or because the evidence then could not take it further. You follow that timeline slowly because it is the work that keeps the file from vanishing. Modern databases changed what investigators could do. Criminal records became easier to search. Vehicle registrations, though old ones could be difficult, could sometimes be revisited. Offender lists could be compared across counties and states. DNA databases offered new possibilities, though only when evidence quality and legal rules allowed their use. But every modern tool meets the old file as it is. A database cannot search what was never entered. A lab cannot test what no longer exists. A new detective cannot interview a witness who has died. You can feel the limits in the room, like cool air near the floor, even as newer technology hums on the desk. This is why cold case work often feels both hopeful and humble. Hopeful because old evidence can surprise people. Humble because time has taken some witnesses, blurred some records, and closed some paths. The Oakland County Child Files case sits exactly in that difficult place, where new methods continue to matter, but no method can fully restore the first days. Those first days had their own lost possibilities. Someone may have seen a car and dismissed it. Someone may have noticed a man and forgotten by dinner. Someone may have heard a child's name in conversation but never connected it. These are not failures in the moral sense. They are the ordinary limits of ordinary life, before anyone knows a moment will become important. You and I know this from our own days. We pass hundreds of details without keeping them. A license plate, a coat, a voice in a store aisle, the pattern of salt on a sidewalk. Only later, if something happens, do ordinary details become evidence, and by then they may already have dissolved back into the day. Investigators in 1976 and 1977 were asking people to retrieve dissolved details. That is delicate work. Ask too little, and you miss something. Ask too much, and you may shape the memory. Ask too late, and the memory has mingled with news reports, neighborhood talk, and dreams. The best interviews try to leave room around the truth. The case also had the difficulty of offender behavior that did not leave a clear public pattern after Timothy King. The confirmed series stopped. That fact has always raised questions. Did the offender die, move, get arrested for something else, become too frightened by attention, continue elsewhere in a way never connected? You hold each question carefully, without pretending one is the answer. A series that stops can be harder than one that continues, even though the stopping spares future victims. It leaves no later scene to compare, no later mistake, no later witness. It freezes the investigation and the evidence already gathered. The file becomes a sealed winter, and everyone who returns to it must work within that weather. In the Oakland County Child Killer investigation, that sealed winter included uncertainty about whether one person acted alone. Some theories considered more than one person. Some looked at networks of offenders, some focused on individual suspects. Each theory had to answer the same hard questions about access, timing, evidence, and motive. Many theories could sound plausible. Few could carry proof. The idea of multiple people can feel tempting in a complicated case because it explains how some facts might spread across places and times. But it also multiplies the need for evidence. Who knew who? Who had which car? Who was where on which date? Who could be connected to the children, the recovery locations, or the physical evidence? The questions grow, and each needs its own support. You can imagine a detective drawing lines between names on a board, then erasing some by morning. A line that looks strong at midnight may look weaker after records are checked. Another line may seem impossible until a new interview places two people in the same room years earlier. This is the slow craft of investigation, made of patience more than revelation. The Oakland County Child Files case went cold because the craft never reached the final stitch. There were threads, there were knots, there were places where the fabric seemed to pull toward a shape. But the finished pattern did not emerge in a way that could be carried into court and set before a jury with confidence. For the families, official caution could feel like distance. For detectives, caution was sometimes the only way to protect the case from collapsing under weak proof. You and I can understand both positions. A family wants movement because waiting has already taken too much. An investigator knows that a failed prosecution or a public accusation without enough evidence can damage the search for truth. That balance is one of the hardest rooms in the file. There is no perfect posture in it. Speak too firmly, and you may overstate. Speak too carefully, and you may sound evasive. Release information, and you risk compromising future work. Hold information, and families may feel shut out. Every choice has a cost, and the case keeps the receipt. In later years, some relatives criticized the original investigation and later handling of evidence. Those concerns became part of the public history. They asked whether certain suspects were protected overlooked, or insufficiently pursued. They questioned missing records and decisions made in the early years. You can feel the weight of those questions without turning the telling sharp, because when a case remains unsolved for decades, trust itself becomes evidence of another kind, not courtroom evidence, but emotional evidence. Families measure whether institutions have been careful, honest, and persistent. Communities measure whether the official story accounts for what they remember. If trust thins, every old gap becomes larger. You sit with that too, because it helps explain why the Oakland County Child Killer case stayed alive in public feeling. It was not only that the case was unsolved, it was that people sensed there were still pages not fully read, still choices not fully explained, still names that had not been settled. The coldness was not empty, it was crowded. A crowded cold case can exhaust even dedicated investigators. Every renewed lead brings hope, work, and the possibility of disappointment. A detective may spend weeks on one suspect only to find an alibi that holds. Another may request testing, wait months, and receive a result that excludes more than it reveals. Progress can look like subtraction. Subtraction matters. It clears space. It prevents false answers. But emotionally, it can feel like walking away from another door. You can picture a detective marking a lead as closed, then pausing before the next folder. The pen leaves a small, dark line on the form. The room is quiet except for the heating system and the dry movement of paper. Sometimes a cold case advances by learning what is not true. A suspect was not in the area. A vehicle was sold earlier. A witness misremembered the year. A piece of evidence came from handling rather than the offender. Each correction is valuable, but none of them feels like the answer a family has waited for. The file becomes cleaner and still incomplete. The Oakland County Child Files case has had many cleaners of this kind. People have tried to separate confirmed fact from rumor, evidence from theory, and possible connection from demonstrated link. That is careful work, and it is rarely satisfying in the ordinary sense. It does not end the story. It makes the story more honest. Honesty is part of the sleep we are making here. Not sleepy because it is careless, but sleepy because it is steady. You can let the file rest open without demanding that every page resolve. You can notice the names, the roads, the rooms, and the years, while the narrator beside you keeps the lamp low and the pace unhurried. There is also the matter of how the offender may have moved through ordinary spaces. Oakland County, in the 70s, had roads that made quick travel possible between suburbs. Woodward Avenue, Telegraph Road, I-75, and other routes connected communities. A person with a vehicle could pass from one town to another without seeming remarkable. The roads themselves became part of the mystery. You can hear those roads at night, tires over wet pavement, a turn signal ticking softly, a heater fan running inside a car, streetlights passing across a windshield in pale bands. Investigators had to think about travel time, opportunity, familiarity, and whether the person responsible knew these places well enough to move without drawing attention. But knowing a place is difficult to prove. Many people knew those roads. Many people shopped at those stores. Many people had reasons to be near schools, neighborhoods, and commercial strips. The ordinary density of suburban life protected the unknown person, not because the suburbs were empty, but because they were full of ordinary explanations. That is another quiet reason the case went cold. The offender did not need to cross a remote landscape. He moved, or they moved, through places where adults and children were already present. A car near a store was not automatically strange. A man asking a question was not automatically remembered. Familiar places can hide unfamiliar danger simply by remaining familiar. You and I can feel how hard that is for investigators. If something unusual happened in a deserted place, every detail might stand out. But in a busy suburb, the background is thick. The parking lot has several cars. The sidewalk has several people. The store has customers coming and going. The memory must find one thread in a woven cloth. The children's last known movements also differed. Mark at the American Legion Hall, Jill leaving home, Christine going to a convenience store, Timothy going to a drugstore. These differences meant investigators could not rely on one repeated lure or one repeated location type. The pattern existed, but it was not simple enough to point in one clean direction. A simple pattern gives detectives something to guard. a specific store type, a specific time, a specific approach. Here, the known points were spread across different circumstances, and the unknown approach remained unknown. You turn that over slowly because it shows why public warnings could be broad, and broad warnings can frighten without precisely guiding. The case asked parents to be careful everywhere, near stores, near streets, near familiar buildings, at certain hours, in winter and early spring. That kind of warning changes daily life, but it does not give detectives a narrow trap. You can feel the frustration in that. The county became watchful, yet watchfulness did not produce the one observation that solved it. When Timothy disappeared, police were already alert, and the public was already listening. Still, the offender was not stopped in that moment. That fact has haunted the case for decades. It suggests either boldness, luck, planning, or some combination no one could fully untangle. You hold those possibilities carefully because none of them by itself is proof. A cold case often becomes a conversation between what happened and what can be known. The gap between those two is where people spend years. The Oakland County Child Killer investigation lives in that gap. Something happened in real streets, to real children, in real time. But the surviving record does not fully reveal how, by whom, or why. In the archive room, the gap has texture. It is the blank part of a report, the missing interview tape, the witness who cannot be found, the evidence envelope that contains something important but not enough. You can smell old paper and cardboard, and you can feel the quiet frustration of facts that stop just short of speech. Yet people continue to ask. Detectives, prosecutors, journalists, researchers, and families return to the file. Some came with theories, some came with science, some came with documents, some came only with the old human refusal to let children become entries in a forgotten ledger. That refusal is one of the gentlest strengths in the case. You might imagine a detective near retirement, looking again at a photocopied map. The ink is lighter now. The towns still sit where they sat. Ferndale, Royal Oak, Berkeley, Birmingham. His hand rests beside the paper, and for a moment he remembers not only the case, but the sound of the office when the phones would not stop ringing. Memory belongs to investigators too. They carry cases in ways they do not always describe. A retired officer may remember the smell of a recovery scene, but choose not to speak of it. Another may remember a parent's voice. Another may remember a suspect who felt wrong but never became chargeable. These memories sit outside the official file, and yet they are part of the human record. The Oakland County Child Files case asked many people to live with unfinished work. That is not easy for the kind of person drawn to investigation. Detectives tend to like sequence, explanation, the satisfaction of a fact placed correctly. An unsolved case resists that need. It remains on the shelf like a sentence without its final clause. Still, unfinished does not mean untouched. Over the years, the file has been reopened, reviewed, discussed, and tested. Investigators have looked again at physical evidence. Families have sought answers through courts and public requests. Reporters have reconstructed timelines. Each return adds a layer, even when it does not add an ending. You can see the layers if you imagine the file as a stack of paper from different eras. Original typed reports, later photocopies, modern printouts, emails, legal filings, news articles, handwritten notes. The stack is not neat, but it is alive in its own quiet way because people keep adding their attempts to understand. And every attempt begins again with the children. Mark Stebbins, Jill Robinson, Christine Mihelic, Timothy King. Their names are the center, not the suspects, not the theories, not the arguments. You let the names rest in the room with care, because a cold case can lose its balance if it becomes only a puzzle. It was never only a puzzle. That distinction matters for sleep narration too. We are not chasing shock. We are sitting with patient sorrow, patient work, and the dignity of names remembered. The case went cold for practical reasons, forensic reasons, jurisdictional reasons, and evidentiary reasons. But beneath all of that is a human fact. People kept trying because the children mattered. The next part of the file takes us deeper into those attempts, into the specific ways later investigators and families returned to old suspects, old evidence, and old decisions. while the same winter roads waited beneath every new question. The next part of the file takes us deeper into those attempts, into the specific ways later investigators and families returned to old suspects, old evidence, and old decisions, while the same winter roads waited beneath every new question. You open the Oakland County Child Killer file again, and the room feels still, as if the paper itself has learned to breathe slowly. One of the first things you notice in an old investigation is how many voices live inside it. A detective's voice in a typed report, a parent's voice in a public plea, a witness's voice in a statement taken under fluorescent light, a lab analyst's voice in careful technical language. The file becomes a hallway of voices, and as you walk it, you have to listen without letting one voice drown out the rest. Some voices are certain, some are tired, some are frightened, some are trying to remember a day that has already begun to fade. In the Oakland County Child Files case, those voices continued to echo for decades, and each new reviewer had to decide which echoes were evidence, which were context, and which were only the understandable sound of a community searching for meaning. You can imagine a later cold case investigator sitting down with the original reports and a legal pad beside them. The old pages smell faintly sweet, the way aging paper sometimes does, and the newer pad has a sharper, cleaner scent. The investigator draws a line down the page. Confirmed facts on one side, questions on the other. Between them lies the long work. That division is important because the case had gathered so much public theory. Over the years, certain names became familiar to people who followed the Oakland County Child Killer investigation. Some names came from police work, some from family research, some from journalists, some from people looking at the case from the outside, trying to make sense of fragments through persistence and concern. But a cold case cannot live by familiar names alone. A familiar suspect can become familiar because the evidence points there, or because the story keeps circling back, or because the public needs a shape to hold. You have to ask the same quiet questions every time. What places the person near the case? What evidence ties them? What excludes them? What remains only suspicion? When Christopher Bush's name appears in later discussions, the paper seems to thicken around it. He came from a family with influence, and he had a criminal history that drew attention for understandable reasons. He died in 1978, before any modern re-examination could question him. You sit with that fact, because death closes some doors while leaving others open in the mind. Some investigators and family advocates believed Bush deserved more scrutiny. They pointed to circumstantial details, associations, and the way his name seemed to sit near other troubling names. Other officials were more cautious, noting that suspicion did not equal proof. In this difference, you can hear one of the central tensions of the Oakland County Child Files case, a tension between felt significance and legal certainty. The file does not resolve that tension for us. It asks us to keep reading. You can picture a detective reviewing old interview notes connected to Bush, then setting them beside lab reports, timelines, and witness accounts. The desk becomes crowded. A coffee cup leaves a ring on a scrap sheet. Outside the office, traffic moves steadily, indifferent to the effort inside. Bush's death also created practical limits. There could be no fresh interrogation, no chance to compare his words against new evidence, no way to observe hesitation or contradiction in person. Investigators could only examine what remained around him: records, associates, evidence, locations, patterns. You feel the quiet frustration of trying to question a shadow through documents. In a case like this, associates matter because people do not always move alone through their darker choices. Investigators and later researchers looked at connections among known offenders, possible acquaintances, and circles that may have overlapped in disturbing ways. But overlap is not conclusion. People can know each other without sharing a crime. A name in another person's address book can be meaningful, or it can be nothing. That is why the work becomes so slow. You cannot simply draw a circle around everyone near a suspect and call it solved. You have to test each connection. Did they meet? When? Where? How often? Could they have used the same vehicle? Did their schedules allow involvement? Did physical evidence support the theory? Each question is a small lamp in a large, dim room. The Oakland County Child Killer case has often attracted theories involving more than one person. You can understand why. The logistics seem difficult to many people. The confidence required seems hard to imagine. The differences between the children's last known circumstances invite questions about whether more than one method or more than one person was involved. Still, theories must kneel before evidence. Evidence does not always answer kindly. It may say, not enough. It may say, possibly, but not uniquely. It may say, excluded. It may say, unable to determine. You can imagine reading those words in a lab report and feeling both gratitude and disappointment. Because even uncertainty has a formal vocabulary, and that vocabulary can be very quiet. Another later lead involved Arch Sloan, whose name came under attention because of forensic comparisons and his own criminal background. He was not charged in the Oakland County Child Killer case. That fact must remain clear. His appearance in the file shows how later science could open a line of inquiry, but it also shows how a line of inquiry can stop short of a courtroom door. When you read about DNA in an old case, you may expect a bright answer. Modern stories often teach us to expect that, but older evidence sometimes offers only partial speech. A hair may preserve limited material. Testing may identify a maternal line rather than one individual. Contamination concerns may complicate interpretation. The science is real, but its voice can be softer than television suggests. You can feel this in the texture of the lab paperwork. The language is precise. The conclusions are measured. The analyst does not reach beyond what the result can support. That restraint matters. It protects the truth from being stretched. In the Oakland County Child Files case, restraint has often been necessary, even when everyone wanted the evidence to speak louder. There is something almost tender about a preserved piece of evidence. It sits in an envelope for years, silent and ordinary to the eye. A label holds a date, tape seals an edge. Someone's initials cross the fold. You hold it carefully, not because it looks powerful, but because it may be one of the few remaining physical connections to a vanished moment. The original investigators preserved what they could, and later, investigators asked new questions of those items. Fibers, hairs, clothing, and other materials were examined across time as methods changed. Some comparisons helped, some did not. Some narrowed possibilities, some created debate about how much weight should be placed on a particular result. The file kept absorbing these new layers. The Oakland County Child Killer investigation was not only a question of who, but also of where. Where were the children during the time they were missing? Where was the vehicle kept? Where did the offender feel safe? Where did the person responsible learn those roads? These questions return again and again, like soft footsteps in a hallway. For Christine Mihelic, the length of time before she was found raised questions about a location where she could have been held. For the others, too, investigators had to think about privacy, access, and movement. A private home, a garage, a basement, a business, a vacant property. Each possibility carried its own investigative demands, and each needed proof that never fully arrived. You can picture detectives checking properties in winter, breath visible in the cold air, flashlights moving across garage floors, the smell of oil, concrete, cardboard, and old leaves near a side door. Most places would reveal nothing. Most searches would end with notes, signatures, and the dull ache of not finding what might have changed everything. Searches can be misunderstood from the outside. People may imagine the police either find the answer or fail to search. The truth is often quieter. They search many places, find many ordinary things, and document emptiness again and again. An empty search is not wasted, but it does not soothe a family waiting for the one place that matters. The case also carried the question of vehicles. Witness accounts over the years included references to cars that might have mattered, including blue vehicles, gremlins, and other descriptions that have circulated in public discussion. We do not need to chase each description sharply. It is enough to understand that vehicles became moving fragments, glimpsed briefly and remembered imperfectly. A car in a cold case is both solid and elusive. It has make, model, year, color, registration, and ownership history. It also has movement, shadows, repainting, sale, disposal, and mistaken memory. You can imagine investigators comparing lists of owners, asking who had access, Who borrowed a car? Who repaired one? And who might have changed what witnesses remembered? In the 1970s, that work required patience. Records were not instantly searchable. A detective might wait for files, call agencies, inspect paper registrations, or speak with mechanics and neighbors. You can smell the oil in a service garage, hear the clang of a tool against concrete, and watch a detective ask about a car that may or may not have been there months before. Over time, vehicles vanish. They are sold, scrapped, rusted, repainted, or forgotten in fields and yards. A car that might have mattered in 1977 could be gone by 1985. That passage matters deeply. Physical objects do not wait forever, even when evidence rooms do. The wider world keeps wearing things down. The Oakland County Child Files case went cold, partly because some important objects may never have been identified while they still existed. The right vehicle, if there was one, may not have been found in time. The right place may not have been searched before it changed. The right witness may not have realized what they saw until memory had already softened. And yet, the file continued to receive attention. That is the rhythm of a cold case. Not a straight line, but a return. Years of stillness may be followed by a new test, a new interview, a new document release, a new public appeal. You turn the page and see dates from different decades sitting side by side, as if time has folded itself into the folder. When families pushed for more information, they sometimes met institutional resistance. Some of that resistance may have come from legal caution, some from concern about active leads, some from old habits of secrecy, some from fear of criticism. Whatever the reason, the effect was often painful. Families felt kept outside a room built around their own loss. You can imagine how that feels at a kitchen table. A letter from an office, a phone call that gives little detail, a promise to review, a request denied or delayed. The paper lies flat under the lamp, but the feeling is not flat. It has years inside it. It has birthdays, anniversaries, and the sound of a name spoken in a family long after the newspapers moved on. In the Oakland County Child Killer investigation, family advocacy became part of the case's later life. Relatives sought files, questioned official conclusions, and brought public attention to possible leads. Their persistence did not solve the case in a clean way, but it prevented the file from becoming only an artifact. It kept the human center visible. That kind of advocacy can be difficult for officials. It can reopen old disputes. It can challenge decisions made by people no longer present to explain them. It can demand clarity from records that were never built for public understanding. But it can also bring fresh eyes, moral pressure, and renewed seriousness to files that might otherwise sit too quietly. You and I can hold both truths. Families may not have every piece of investigative context. Officials may not feel the full private cost of silence. Between those realities, there is often pain. The best cold case work tries to make room for communication without damaging the investigation. That balance is delicate, and in this case it has often been strained. The physical archives themselves may have added difficulty. Reports duplicated across agencies can differ slightly. A missing page may raise a question that has an innocent explanation or a serious one. A notation may be unclear. A file number may refer to a box no one has opened in years. You can hear the soft thud of another carton placed on the table. Old paperwork has a way of making time visible. Typewriter letters press unevenly into the page. Photocopies fade at the edges. Handwritten notes slant according to the mood and speed of the person writing. A detective's initials become the only sign of a decision made long ago. You read those marks slowly, because sometimes the smallest mark tells you where to look next. In the Oakland County Child Files case, the question of what was recorded, what was preserved, and what was later accessible became part of the case's public story. People asked whether certain leads had been pursued thoroughly. They asked whether suspects with influence received different treatment. They asked whether evidence had been handled properly. Those questions did not arise from nowhere. At the same time, answering them decades later is difficult. A decision that looks strange now may have depended on information not visible in the surviving copy. A lead that seems obvious to follow may have been checked in another file. A missing document may have been misfiled, lost, or never created. The archive resists certainty, even about itself. This is why cold case review often begins with rebuilding the file before rebuilding the theory. You inventory, you scan, you index, you compare duplicates, you track evidence logs, you identify missing materials, you create timelines. This work is slow and almost invisible, but without it, every theory rests on uneven ground. You can sit beside that process for a while. The scanner light passes beneath a page. A file name appears on a computer screen. Someone tags a document with a date, a location, a child's name, a suspect's name. The modern world enters the old case quietly, not with a sudden answer, but with better shelves. Digital organization can reveal patterns the human eye missed, but it can also reveal disorder that was always there. A name spelled two ways, a street name abbreviated differently, a suspect listed by nickname in one report and full name in another. You and I know how easily a search can fail if one letter is wrong, and old files are full of human letters. The Oakland County Child Killer investigation began before this kind of digital cross-checking was ordinary. Early detectives relied on index cards, paper logs, memory and communication between people. That does not mean they were careless. It means their tools were slower, and slowness can hide connections when the volume of material grows faster than the system can sort it. Imagine walls of index cards, each one a person, a vehicle, a tip, or a location. Cards sorted, resorted, pulled, copied, and returned. A card placed in the wrong stack could disappear from practical use without truly being lost. The smell of cardstock, ink, and dust becomes part of the investigation's body. The case is not only evidence, it is filing. Filing sounds small until a child's name depends on it. A misfiled lead can mean a delayed interview can mean a changed memory. A changed memory can mean uncertainty, where clarity might once have been possible. You can feel how administrative work, the quietest work of all, can shape the fate of a case. This does not mean one clerical mistake explains the Oakland County Child Files case. The reasons were larger than that. But many small difficulties can gather into a cold front. Limited forensic tools, fragile witness memory. Many jurisdictions, public fear, suspect uncertainty, archival disorder, legal thresholds. Over time, these conditions make a case harder to move. Still, people kept making attempts. At times, law enforcement reviewed possible links to other crimes. At times, they reconsidered known offenders who were active in Michigan or nearby states. Some possibilities led nowhere. Some remained open in limited ways. The file grew not only from what was found, but from what had to be excluded. Exclusion has a quiet moral value. It prevents the wrong person from becoming an answer simply because the right answer is absent. You sit with that, because in a case filled with grief, the pressure to name someone can become intense. Careful investigators have to resist false closure, even when false closure would seem to give the room a shape. The children deserved truth, not just a name. Their families deserved proof, not only theory. The community deserved accuracy, not rumor wearing the clothes of certainty. That is why the case's coldness is so painful. It is not an empty coldness. It is the coldness of a door that many people have pushed against, only to find it still holding. In later decades, forensic genealogy became a powerful tool. In some old cases, you may think of other investigations, where small traces of DNA eventually led to distant relatives, family trees, and long-awaited arrests. Those stories changed public expectations. They made people wonder whether every old file might finally speak. But each case has its own evidence, its own legal permissions, and its own limits. For the Oakland County Child Killer case, any future use of newer methods depends on what evidence remains, what kind of biological material it contains, and whether it can be tested in a legally and scientifically meaningful way. That sentence is careful because the work is careful. Hope must be placed where evidence can carry it. You can imagine a modern analyst handling an old item with gloves, the room cool, the surface clean, the tools arranged with almost ritual precision. The evidence may look ordinary beneath the light, a fiber, a hair, a piece of fabric. Yet everyone in the room understands that ordinary-looking things can hold the last remaining chance to narrow a path. There is patience even in the laboratory. Samples wait in queues. Results are reviewed. Controls are checked. Contamination is considered. Reports are written in measured language. The analyst does not know the children in the way the families do, but the care of the work is a form of respect. Precision is compassion when the facts have become fragile. Sometimes the result of that care is silence. No usable profile, no match, no conclusion. The file returns to the shelf with one more page added, and the waiting begins again. You feel the weight of that, but you do not rush away from it. In cold case work, an inconclusive result is still part of the truth. Other times, a result may suggest a path, but require more work. A possible association, a need for comparison samples, a reason to revisit an old suspect's relatives, a legal request, a family notification. Each step has its own process, and each process takes time. The file moves forward by inches, not miles. The Oakland County Child Files case has survived many inches. A public record request, a lab test, an interview, a new article, a documentary inquiry, a meeting between officials and relatives. None of these alone solved it, but each one kept the file from disappearing into institutional sleep. You can respect that persistence, even while recognizing its limits. There is a difference between a case being inactive and a case being unsolved. This case, by many accounts, has seen periods of activity and renewed review, even though no one has been convicted as the Oakland County Child Killer. That distinction matters. Cold does not always mean abandoned. Sometimes cold means unresolved despite repeated returns. You can feel that distinction in the metaphor of temperature. A case may be cold to the public because no answer has arrived. Inside an evidence room, though, it may still be handled. Inside a family, it may never cool at all. Inside a retired detective's memory, one detail may remain warm for a lifetime. The phrase "went cold" can also hide the emotional labor of waiting. Waiting for a lab, waiting for a prosecutor's decision, waiting for a witness to call back, waiting for a name to be confirmed or excluded. Families become expert in waiting, though nobody should have to learn that expertise. You and I sit with waiting as part of the story, not as filler, as fact. The Oakland County Child Killer investigation is made of searches, yes, but also of long pauses between searches. Months when nothing public changed. Years when the same questions remained. Decades when people aged while the file stayed the same age at its center. The children in the file remained 12, 10, and 11. The adults around them grew older. That is one of the quietest sorrows of an old case. Time moves for everyone except the children at its center. You notice this when you read dates decades apart and see the same school photographs, the same faces, the same small biographical details repeated in newer reports. Those photographs mattered too. A case file photograph is both evidence and memory. The texture of the print may change over time. Glossy surfaces dull slightly, copies lose contrast. A face becomes familiar to strangers who never knew the child. You hold the page carefully, because even a photocopied image asks for gentleness. In public discussion, the children can sometimes become symbols of a case, but inside the file, they were individual lives. Mark, Jill, Christine, Timothy. Different families, different routines, different last days, different rooms left behind. We return to their names not to repeat them dramatically, but to keep the file properly centered. The question of why the Oakland County Child Files case went cold must always circle back to that center. It went cold because the person responsible was not proven. It went cold because evidence did not become enough. It went cold because time harmed memory and opportunity. It went cold because systems are made of people, and people work within limits. But even those reasons are not the end of the thinking. There is also the unsettling possibility that the offender benefited from respectability, mobility, privacy, or the simple cover of ordinary suburban life. A person can pass as unremarkable in a community that does not know what to look for. You sit with that softly, because it explains without exciting. Investigators had to examine people who did not look like monsters, because real cases rarely offer such simple appearances. A suspect might have a job, a family, a familiar car, a polite manner, or a quiet street address. This made witness accounts difficult. Someone may have seen a person who seemed ordinary and therefore did not hold the memory tightly. That ordinariness is one of the hardest parts of patient detective work. You cannot search only for what looks strange. You have to ask whether the ordinary thing was placed in the wrong moment. The ordinary car idling too long. The ordinary adult speaking too closely. The ordinary errand that did not end as it should have. The Oakland County Child Killer case forced investigators to study the ordinary until it became almost unbearable. Stores, streets, parking lots, family halls, drugstore counters, winter sidewalks. Each place had to be reimagined, not as background, but as possible witness. You can feel the exhaustion in that, the way a familiar map can become covered in questions. And yet, maps can only tell part of the story. They show distance, not intention. Roads, not choices. Locations, not the unseen moment when one life crossed another. The file asks for that missing moment again and again. Where did contact occur? What was said? Why did no one stop it? The answers remain absent, and absence has its own pressure. As you turn another page, you notice that some reports are full of action while others are full of waiting. A search warrant executed, a suspect interviewed, a lab comparison requested. Then weeks pass. Months. A new notation appears. No further information. Unable to confirm, lead closed. The bureaucratic language is calm, but beneath it lies effort that did not reach resolution. This is the texture of a cold file. Motion. Pause. Motion pause. A lead rises, then thins. A name appears, then disappears. An item is tested, then returns inconclusive. You can almost hear the breath of the case in that rhythm, not asleep exactly, but resting between attempts. The next set of pages draws us toward the long public afterlife of the case, where memory, media, family pressure, and official caution continued to meet over the same old evidence, while the unanswered winter remained quietly present beneath every new return. The next set of pages draws us toward the long public afterlife of the case, where memory, media, family pressure, and official caution continued to meet over the same old evidence, while the unanswered winter remained quietly present beneath every new return. You can feel the Oakland County Child Killer file becoming more than an investigation now, becoming a public memory that many people carried in different ways. A public memory does not sit neatly in a file cabinet. It lives in newspaper clippings folded into drawers, in parents remembering how they changed the rules of their homes, in children who grew up hearing warnings they only partly understood. You might sit with a stack of old articles and notice how the ink has faded unevenly. The paper feels dry, almost brittle, and the dates keep pulling you back to the same months. In those articles, officials often had to speak carefully. They needed the public's help, but they also needed to protect details only the offender might know. That is one of the quiet difficulties in any major case. You have to ask people to remember while keeping some parts of the memory sealed. The case becomes a room where not every drawer can be opened. Families sometimes experience that caution as distance. You can understand why. When a child is gone and no one has been held responsible, every withheld detail can feel like a door closing. Officials may have had reasons, but reasons do not remove the ache. In the Oakland County Child Files case, this tension remained for years, sometimes soft, sometimes very sharp. The media kept returning because the case had never settled. A solved case can become history. An unsolved case keeps asking for present attention. Each anniversary, each new test, each newly discussed suspect gave reporters a reason to stand again on familiar ground. You can hear the low voice of a television narrator, the rustle of a reporter's notes, the hum of a camera in a quiet suburban street. That attention helped preserve the names of Mark Stebbins, Jill Robinson, Christine Mihelich, and Timothy King. It also created risk. A case can become simplified when it is told too quickly. A suspect can become fixed in the public mind before proof is complete. A theory can become more memorable than a fact. You and I have to move more slowly than that. Moving slowly means noticing the difference between official findings and public belief. Official findings are often narrow because they must be. Public belief can be wide, emotional, and shaped by what seems to fit. In the Oakland County Child Killer investigation, those two ways of knowing did not always match. The gap between them became part of the story. You might imagine a detective reading a newspaper account and feeling the file flatten in the telling. A paragraph can make months of work seem simple. A sentence can make uncertainty look like neglect. Sometimes the criticism may be fair. Sometimes it may miss what the file actually contains. The only honest way through is to return to the paper, the evidence, the dates, and the names. The families returned too, and often with more endurance than anyone else. They did not have the luxury of professional distance. The case was not a shift, a caseload, or a retired assignment. It lived with them. You can imagine a box kept at home, not in an evidence room, holding clippings, letters, photographs, and copies of official pages worn at the fold. A family box has a different feeling than a police box. It may smell faintly of a house, of old envelopes, of a closet shelf. It may hold birthday cards beside investigative notes. It may hold photographs that were never meant to be public. When you sit beside that box, the Oakland County Child Files case becomes smaller and larger at once. Smaller because it is intimate, larger because the loss fills the room. Over the years, some family members became especially active in questioning the investigation. They looked at suspects. They challenged agencies. They pressed for files. They asked why certain leads seemed to fade. Their work could be meticulous, emotional, and exhausting. You can hear the rustle of copied documents at a dining room table late at night, while the rest of the house sleeps. That kind of work is not the same as police work, but it can influence police work. Families may remember overlooked details. They may connect public information in new ways. They may keep pressure on officials who might otherwise move slowly. Yet family research also carries the weight of longing, and longing can make caution feel almost unbearable. In the Oakland County Child Killer case, that tension between longing and caution never fully disappeared. Officials knew that any accusation had to be backed by evidence strong enough to stand in court. Families knew that decades had passed, and waiting had already taken too much. You can sit between those truths without forcing one to erase the other. The public afterlife of the case also included records battles. Old files are not always easily opened, even when they concern events from long ago. Some records may be protected because of ongoing investigation. Some may include private information about witnesses or unrelated people. Some may be incomplete, misfiled, or held by different agencies. Even access becomes a kind of investigation. You can imagine a request being drafted with careful language, a date range, a case number, a list of names. The paper is mailed or filed, and then the waiting begins. Weeks pass, a reply arrives. Some pages are released, some are redacted until the page looks like a window covered with dark strips. Redaction has its own quiet frustration. You can hold a page and see the shape of what is missing. A name blacked out, a sentence removed, a paragraph gone. The remaining words may still matter, but the empty spaces speak too. In an unsolved case, every hidden line can feel like it might be the line that changes everything. Sometimes it is not. Sometimes the hidden line protects a witness who saw little. Sometimes it contains a detail that would not answer the family's question. But because the case is unsolved, imagination gathers around the blank spaces. You and I can understand that, even as we remember that blankness is not proof. The Oakland County Child Files case became, in part, a struggle over who could see the record. Seeing the record is not the same as solving the case, but it can change how people understand the work that was done. It can reveal diligence, it can reveal gaps, it can reveal the ordinary messiness of a large investigation moving through time. Large investigations are rarely clean from the inside. Reports arrive in different formats. People use different terms for the same location. A witness gives one statement in person and another by phone. A detective summarizes, then another detective summarizes the summary. You can feel how easily the original texture of a memory can become smoothed by paperwork. This is why patient review matters. A careful reader may go back to the first version of a statement instead of relying on a later summary. They may compare the exact wording. They may note whether a witness said certain or maybe. They may notice that a time estimate was rounded later. These small differences can matter in the Oakland County Child Killer file because so much depends on fragments. The case also shows how technology changes the meaning of old fragments. A hair collected in 1977 might have been described by color, length, and microscopic traits. Decades later, it might be examined for genetic material. The object has not changed, but the questions asked of it have. You can imagine the evidence envelope under a modern light. The label is old. The room smells clean, almost sharp, with the faint chemical plainness of a laboratory. The analyst works slowly, aware that there may be no second chance with fragile material. Patience is not only emotional here, it is technical. Still, a technical answer can create a new human problem. If testing points toward a person who is dead, investigators may need relatives for comparison. If it points toward a maternal line, the path may branch widely. If it excludes a long-suspected person, some people may struggle to accept the exclusion. Evidence can relieve one burden while creating another. In the Oakland County Child Killer investigation, public theories sometimes became attached to particular suspects so strongly that contradictory evidence could feel like another loss. That is one of the hazards of waiting too long for answers. A theory becomes a place to rest, and when the place is challenged, the grief has to move again. You can feel how tiring that would be. The law, however, has to remain colder than grief. Not cruel, but structured. A prosecutor must ask whether evidence proves a charge beyond a reasonable doubt. A detective must ask whether a lead is supported or only compelling. A lab analyst must state only what the test shows. These roles can seem distant, but their restraint protects everyone from false certainty. False certainty is a danger in old cases. It can close the file around the wrong name. It can satisfy public hunger while leaving truth untouched. It can harm living people connected to a suspect. It can make future investigation harder. You and I keep the lamp low and the pace slow because the Oakland County Child Files case deserves better than a rushed answer. The public often asks why no one was ever arrested. The quieter answer is that arrest is not the same as suspicion, and suspicion is not the same as proof. Many people may have been examined. Some may have seemed troubling. Some may have had histories that made them plausible. But the file had to connect a person to the specific crimes, not simply to danger in general. That distinction matters deeply. A known offender in the region might be morally frightening, but unless evidence ties him to Mark, Jill, Christine, or Timothy, he cannot simply become the Oakland County Child Killer. You can feel the discipline required in that. It is hard, especially when the case is old and the need for answers is so strong. The same is true for associations. If two disturbing people knew each other, that might matter. It also might not. If one owned a vehicle similar to a reported vehicle, that might matter. It also might not. If someone lived near a route, worked near a town, or had access to privacy, those facts must be placed carefully, neither ignored nor inflated. This careful placement is what patient detective work asks of us. You set one fact on the table, then another. You do not stack them too quickly. You look at how they touch. You ask whether the connection is real or only convenient. The surface of the table grows crowded, and still the answer does not announce itself. In the Oakland County Child Killer case, the passage of time also affected suspects in practical ways. People died. Records disappeared. Homes were sold. Cars were scrapped. Work histories became difficult to confirm. A person's habits from 1977 might have been known to neighbors then, but those neighbors may no longer be available. This is why the earliest phase of an investigation is so precious. It is when objects still exist, memories are fresh, and routines can be checked. Once years pass, the case becomes more dependent on what was preserved. The preserved record becomes the shoreline. If the shoreline is broken, later investigators have to step carefully around the gaps. The original task force did preserve a great deal. That is worth noting. The Oakland County Child Files case is not empty. It contains reports, evidence, witness accounts, lab work, suspect lists, and later reviews. The problem is that abundance does not guarantee clarity. Sometimes abundance creates a forest, and the path through it remains hidden. You can picture that forest as file boxes stretching across shelves. Each box is labeled. Each label promises order. But inside, the case branches. One name leads to another, one vehicle leads to a list, one list leads to interviews. One interview leads to a place, one place leads back to uncertainty. Walking that landscape requires stamina. A new investigator cannot absorb everything in a day. They have to learn the case's language, its repeated names, its known dead ends, its disputed points, and its emotional history. You can imagine them making their own notes in a careful hand, trying not to inherit old assumptions too easily. Old assumptions can be dangerous. If an early theory shaped how evidence was interpreted, later readers must ask whether the theory narrowed the view too soon. At the same time, old instincts can be valuable. A detective who worked the original case may remember why a lead mattered, or why it was set aside. The challenge is to honor experience without being trapped by it. The Oakland County Child Killer file contains that challenge again and again. Later readers must ask what earlier investigators saw, what they missed, what they could not have known, and what they knew but could not prove. These are not simple categories. They overlap, and their edges are soft. You read them with care, the way you might handle thin paper near a tear. The public discussion of the case sometimes focused on possible cover-ups. This is understandable in a case involving influential names, incomplete answers, and family frustration. You can acknowledge that without turning the narration into accusation. Questions about influence and institutional protection deserve careful examination. They also require evidence, because suspicion of a cover-up can become its own fog. Fog is a useful word here. It does not mean nothing is there. It means visibility is reduced. In the Oakland County Child Files case, public distrust, missing clarity, and unresolved leads created fog around certain parts of the investigation. Some fog may hide something significant. Some may be made only of age, bureaucracy, and the natural confusion of a vast file. A patient investigator does not wave the fog away. They wait, measure, and move through it slowly. They look for fixed points. A date, a location, a document with a signature, a lab result, a confirmed interview. These fixed points become fence posts in the dimness, and the case is rebuilt from post to post. You and I can do the same in our listening. We return to what is known. 4 children in Oakland County and nearby areas. Disappearances between February of 1976 and March of 1977. A major investigation. Many tips, no conviction. Later forensic review. Persistent family advocacy. The known facts remain simple to state, while their meaning remains hard to finish. But we do not stay only with the broad facts. We return to the small rooms. The American Legion Hall. The Royal Oak Home. The convenience store on 12 Mile. The drugstore errand. These places keep the case human. They remind us that before the file became famous, each event began in a life with routines, sounds, smells, and ordinary expectations. You can hear the bright bell of a store door. You can feel cold air entering behind a customer. You can smell candy, magazine paper, floor wax, and damp winter coats. These are not clues by themselves, but they keep the investigation grounded. Without them, the case becomes abstract. And abstraction is not kind to memory. Memory needs texture. Detectives know this when they interview witnesses. They may ask where someone was standing, what the weather felt like, what else was happening, whether a radio was playing, whether the person had just bought something. Sensory details can anchor a memory, and sometimes an anchored memory gives back a useful fact. In the Oakland County Child Killer investigation, however, many useful facts remained just out of reach. A witness might remember a vehicle but not the plate, a person but not the face, a time but not the exact hour. The file filled with partial shapes. You can imagine each partial shape placed on a desk like a puzzle piece, without enough edges. A puzzle is not quite the right metaphor, though, because a puzzle comes with all its pieces in the box. A cold case does not. Some pieces were never collected, some were lost to time, some may have been misread, some may belong to an entirely different picture. The investigator's task is harder than puzzling. It is reconstruction from survival. That reconstruction continued through later reviews. Investigators looked again at timelines. They asked whether the offender had employment that allowed movement. They considered school schedules, store hours, traffic patterns, and public events. They asked whether the dates themselves suggested opportunity or habit. You can feel the calendar becoming evidence. Calendars in old cases have their own quiet power. A weekday or weekend can change who is available. A holiday season can change traffic and routines. School breaks can change where children are. Weather can change visibility. You run your finger along a date and realize that the square on the calendar was once a whole living day. The day Jill Robinson left home was near Christmas. The day Christine Mihelic disappeared was just after New Year's. Timothy King disappeared in March, when winter had not fully loosened its grip. Mark Stebbins disappeared in February, deep in the cold season. The winter pattern matters, but it does not explain itself. It only asks another question. Why winter? Was it opportunity? Earlier darkness, clothing that concealed more, seasonal routines. Coincidence? A person's schedule. You do not answer too quickly. You let the question rest beside the others because in the Oakland County Child Files case, many details seem meaningful, but meaning still has to be proven. The recovery locations created another set of questions. They were not all in the same town. They suggested movement and some knowledge of the region. But again, many people knew the region. Suburban roads allow quick passage. A person can leave one jurisdiction and enter another without a gate, without a border anyone feels while driving. You can picture a map at night, not the paper map on the wall, but the lived map of headlights and intersections. A car moves from a residential street to a larger road, from a larger road to another suburb. Streetlights pass over the hood. The radio may be low. The road gives no witness except those who happen to look. Investigators had to think in those movements. How long from one point to another? Which roads were likely? Where could a vehicle pause? Which areas were dark, busy, remote, or familiar? In a time before widespread cameras, movement left fewer traces. The road received the car and then gave back almost nothing. That absence is central to why the case went cold. Today, investigators might seek surveillance, toll records, phone data, digital messages, or automatic plate readers. In 1976 and 1977, the trail depended far more on human sight, physical evidence, and paper records. When human sight was limited, the trail narrowed quickly. You can feel the difference in the file. There are no digital pings waiting to be mapped, no doorbell cameras, no store video archives saved in the cloud, just witness statements, receipts if they existed, logs, calls, and the memory of ordinary people. The investigation lived in a more analog world, and that world left fewer footprints. Analog does not mean crude. The detectives worked with the tools of their time. They canvassed, they interviewed, they compared, they gathered evidence. They organized a large response. But the tools of their time could not perform the miracles later audiences sometimes expect. The case's coldness is partly a record of historical limits. Historical limits can be hard to accept because the harm remains present. A family in the present may wonder why a lab result cannot solve what was preserved. A viewer may wonder why a database cannot identify the person. But the evidence was born in an older world. It comes to the modern lab, carrying the conditions of its birth. That is why preservation is such a recurring theme. An item collected quickly in a snowy field, handled by multiple people, stored under old standards and moved across decades may still hold value. But it may also hold ambiguity. You and I can respect the attempt without pretending ambiguity is enough. The Oakland County Child Killer case also existed before current understandings of offender databases, behavioral analysis, and interagency data sharing were as developed as they later became. Some federal resources were involved and investigators did consider patterns, but the broader infrastructure of serial crime analysis was still evolving. The language and systems were not what they would later be. A modern investigator reading the old file may see places where today's practices would differ. More careful evidence packaging, more structured interviews, digital mapping, faster cross-jurisdiction searches, immediate behavioral linkage systems. Yet the old file must be judged partly within its own era, even as we learned from what the era could not do. You can hold that balance in your hand like two sheets of paper. One sheet says people did the best they could. The other says the best available then may not have been enough. Both can be true. The Oakland County Child Files case lives between those sheets, pressed flat by time, but not made simple by it. The emotional landscape of the county changed too. After the confirmed series ended, daily fear gradually loosened, but the unanswered question remained. Families still watched children, but life had to continue. Schools reopened after breaks. Stores stayed open. Roads filled again with normal errands. The county learned to live around the mystery, which is not the same as healing it. You can imagine someone who was a child then growing older with the case as background. They remember being driven to places they once walked. They remember parents calling from doorways. They remember whispers at school, posters, news reports, and a feeling that the adult world could not fully protect them. Those memories became part of Oakland County's private archive. Private archives are not always written down. They live in the body. A certain winter smell, a certain street corner, a parent's anxious tone. Years later, someone might pass an old location and feel a small tightening without immediately knowing why. That too is part of how an unsolved case remains present. For investigators, the same places may carry professional memory: a road where they searched, a home where they interviewed a family, a station room where calls came in for hours. You can see how the geography became layered with different kinds of remembering. The public sees suburbs, the file sees coordinates. Families see last known paths. The Oakland County Child Killer investigation asked all of those memories to coexist without a final answer. That coexistence is difficult. A solved case can reframe memory. It can say, this is what happened, this is who did it, this is what the evidence proved. An unsolved case leaves memory open, and open memory keeps shifting. Because it shifts, later generations enter the case differently. Someone born after 1977 might encounter it first as a documentary, a podcast, an article, or a family story. They may know the suspect theories before they know the children's names. They may know the controversy before they know the dates. A patient retelling has to restore the order gently. First the children, then the days, then the investigation, then the evidence, then the theories. That order matters because it keeps the case human. You and I return to it whenever the file begins to feel too crowded. Mark, Jill, Christine, Timothy. The rest of the paper exists because they existed first. As public interest continued, certain disputed points returned again and again. Whether the same person was responsible for all 4 confirmed cases, whether additional victims might be connected, whether one suspect was overlooked, whether evidence had been mishandled, whether influence affected decisions. Each question has its own history, and none can be settled by repetition alone. Repetition can make a claim feel stronger than it is. If a name is spoken often enough, the ear begins to expect it. But evidence does not grow by echo. It grows by corroboration. You can sit with that distinction as the night deepens around the desk, because it is one of the quiet disciplines this case teaches. Corroboration means one fact supporting another from an independent direction. A witness statement matched by a record. A vehicle description matched by ownership and opportunity. A forensic result matched by timeline and access. In the Oakland County Child Files case, many fragments seem to lean toward one another, but the full structure did not hold firmly enough. That is the coldness again. Not emptiness, insufficiency. A case may be rich with material and still poor in proof. It may contain thousands of pages and still lack the one page that matters most. You can feel the sadness of that. The file is not silent, but it does not say the final thing. At times, investigators may have believed they were close. Many old cases have those moments. A suspect rises, a test is ordered, a witness is found. A prosecutor reviews a packet. The room becomes quietly alert. Then something fails to connect. The suspect is excluded, the test is inconclusive. The witness is uncertain, or the legal review stops short. You can imagine the emotional drop after such a moment. It would not be theatrical. It might be a long exhale, a closed folder, a note entered into a system. The office light remains the same. The phone still rings. The work continues, but the hoped-for turning point becomes another entry in the chronology. For families, Those rises and drops can be especially hard. A possible break may bring cautious hope, and cautious hope is still hope. When it fades, the old waiting returns with new weight. You can feel why some families become wary of updates, even as they continue seeking them. Hope, in a cold case, must be handled gently. The Oakland County Child Killer investigation has been handled by many hands, some official, some familial, some journalistic, some private. Each hand leaves something: a note, a request, an interview, a theory, a test, a question. The file becomes a record not only of the original crimes, but of the long human effort to understand them. And because the effort is long, it includes disagreement. Investigators disagree. Families disagree with officials. Reporters disagree with prosecutors. Researchers disagree with one another. Disagreement does not mean the work is unserious. It often means the evidence is incomplete enough that reasonable and unreasonable readings can both find space. A patient reader has to ask which disagreements are grounded in the file and which float above it. That is not always easy. You may need to compare original documents, timelines, and known evidence. You may need to set aside an appealing theory because it lacks support. You may need to keep an uncomfortable possibility open because it has not been excluded. This is slow mental work, and it suits the quiet of the hour. You can let the case spread out without trying to master it all at once. The lamp shines on one page, the rest can wait. The Oakland County Child Files case has waited this long, and we do not need to rush it now. The next pages bring us back toward the investigators themselves, not as heroes in a simple story, and not as villains in an easy one, but as people working under pressure, inside a growing file, with a community asking for answers that the evidence would not yet give. The next pages bring us back toward the investigators themselves, not as heroes in a simple story, and not as villains in an easy one, but as people working under pressure inside a growing file, with a community asking for answers that the evidence would not yet give. You can sit with them for a while in the Oakland County Child Killer investigation, in the long fluorescent evening where duty and uncertainty shared the same desk. The early task force worked in a climate that was difficult to imagine from a distance. The phones did not ring politely. They rang with fear, anger, tips, questions, and sometimes rumor. You can hear that repeated bell in the room, followed by voices trying to stay calm. A detective took a report, asked for spelling, confirmed a street, and wrote while another call waited. There is a kind of exhaustion that belongs only to urgent public cases. It is not only lack of sleep, it is the weight of knowing that every hour matters, and still not knowing which hour holds the important lead. You can picture an officer rubbing tired eyes beneath harsh lights, then returning to a stack of statements because fatigue does not excuse a missed detail. In the Oakland County Child Files case, investigators had to move across several local boundaries. Each department had its own personnel, records, and knowledge of neighborhood patterns. A local officer might know a street's rhythms better than anyone else. A county investigator might see the larger pattern. State and federal help could widen the lens. Coordinating all of that required constant, careful communication. Communication itself becomes labor in a case this large. Someone has to decide what information goes to whom, what is held back, what is urgent, what is background, and what has already been checked. You can imagine a wall chart marked with initials and dates, a lead assigned in blue ink, a follow-up noted in pencil, a question circled because nobody is quite done with it. When the case is young, every lead feels possible. That is both useful and exhausting. A suspicious person near one town, a vehicle seen in another, a known offender living nearby, a caller who remembers something from months earlier. You cannot know at first which thread matters, so you touch many threads. And each one asks for time. The Oakland County Child Killer Task Force had to develop ways to manage that flood. Leads needed numbers, interviews needed summaries. Evidence needed logs, maps needed updates. Suspects needed files of their own. You can smell the paper accumulating, warm from copy machines, stacked near desks, clipped into packets, and moved from one room to another by people who had already worked too long. A large task force can look powerful from the outside, but size creates its own problems. More people means more reach, yet also more chances for duplication, miscommunication, and uneven judgment. One investigator may not know what another has already learned. A report may arrive late. A lead may be closed in one place while still open in another. This is one of the plain administrative reasons a case can go cold. Not because no one works, but because many people work at once, and the system must hold all their work without losing meaning. You and I can feel how difficult that is. A file is not only a container, it is a memory system, and memory systems can strain. The investigators were also working under public fear. Fear changes the atmosphere of a police department. It makes every call feel potentially important. It makes officials cautious about what they say. It makes mistakes more visible and patience harder to preserve. You can hear voices lowering in a meeting room as someone prepares for another public update. A public update in the Oakland County Child Files case would never have been just a public update. It would have been heard by parents deciding whether to let children walk anywhere, by families of the victims listening for signs of progress, by reporters searching for clarity, and perhaps by the person responsible. Every sentence had to carry more weight than it seemed able to carry. This made investigative secrecy necessary, but secrecy also created distance. You can sit with that discomfort. Certain details could not be released because they might help identify a false confession, test a witness, or preserve a future prosecution. Yet the same withheld details could make the public feel that officials were hiding too much. The file became guarded, and guarded things invite questions. Investigators had to consider false confessions too. In high-profile cases, people sometimes confess to things they did not do. Some are mentally unwell, some seek attention, some are confused, some know public details and invent the rest. The police therefore keep certain facts private, so they can measure whether a confession contains knowledge only the offender could have. You can imagine a detective sitting across from a person who claims to know the answer. The room is plain, a recorder may run, the chair creaks slightly. The detective listens without showing too much reaction, asking careful questions. If the person gives only public facts, the claim may collapse. If they give a private fact, the room changes. The Oakland County Child Killer case drew enough attention that false leads were almost inevitable. Every false lead used time. Every false confession required checking. Every strange call had to be handled with enough seriousness to protect the case, but not so much belief that it pulled investigators too far from better evidence. This balance is tiring, and it rarely shows in later summaries. The work also required contact with known offenders in the area. That part of the investigation could be grim without being theatrically dark. Detectives looked at people with histories involving children, people whose movements or vehicles might fit, people who had access to private spaces, and people whose names came from the public. You can feel the heaviness of those files stacked beside the main one. Looking at known offenders can be necessary, but it can also widen the field almost beyond usefulness. A region may contain many people with troubling histories. Some may be easy to find, others may have moved, some may have changed names, jobs, or addresses. The task is to connect one person not merely to a type of crime, but to specific children, dates, places, and evidence. That specific connection is where many suspects fall away. A person may seem frightening, but be elsewhere at the relevant time. Another may own a similar car, but not in the right month. Another may know a suspect, but have no proven role. You can see why the Oakland County Child Files case collected names without collecting enough certainty around any one of them. The pressure to protect the community was immediate. Investigators could not wait for perfect theory before acting on credible concerns. They questioned, searched, watched, and compared as they went. Yet the pressure to build a legal case was different. It demanded patience, documentation, and proof. These two pressures do not always move at the same speed. You and I can imagine the strain between them. One part of the room wants action now. Another part says the action must be supportable later. One person says, "We need to warn the public." Another says, "We cannot release that detail." One family asks what is being done. One official answers carefully. The case moves through these tensions like a slow river under ice. Investigators were human inside those tensions. They had families of their own. Some had children. Some lived in the same counties where the fear moved through schools and stores. A detective might leave the task force room and drive home past the same winter streets, seeing them not as scenery, but as possible routes in the file. Work did not end at the station door. The old photographs from the case would have followed them, not always visibly, but in memory. A school portrait, a family snapshot, a face printed in the newspaper. You can understand why some detectives never fully set a case like this down. The mind returns to the last known place, the possible vehicle, the witness who almost saw enough. This kind of return can be productive, and it can be painful. It may lead someone to notice a pattern after hours away from the desk. It may also keep sleep at a distance. Cold cases are often cold only publicly. For investigators who work them, they can remain warm in memory for years. The Oakland County Child Killer file had that quality for many people. Still, memory alone cannot solve. An investigator's instinct may be valuable, but it must be checked against the record. You can picture an older detective telling a younger one why a lead mattered, then the younger one going back to the paper to see what can be proven. This exchange between lived experience and documented fact is one of the quiet arts of cold case work. As time passed, some original investigators retired or died. Their memories went with them, unless they had been written down. That is another way cases cool. Institutional knowledge fades. A person who knew why a file was arranged a certain way is no longer available. A detective who remembered a witness's tone cannot be asked about it. The record remains, but the living context thins. You feel that thinning when you read old notes that say only "checked out" or "not credible," without explaining why. The words may have made sense to the person who wrote them. Decades later, they become a small locked box. Checked how? Not credible because of what? You cannot always open that box, and the uncertainty becomes part of the file. The Oakland County Child Files case contains many of these small locked boxes. Some may hide nothing more than routine judgment. Some may hide missed opportunities. A patient reviewer does not assume either too quickly. They mark the question, look for supporting documents, and keep going. The work is not to dramatize gaps, but to understand them. Training also changed across the decades. Interview methods changed. Evidence standards changed. Awareness of offender behavior changed. The role of victim families changed. A modern cold case investigator might approach the Oakland County Child Killer file with assumptions and tools that did not exist in the 70s. That can reveal old weaknesses, but it can also create unfair hindsight if handled without care. Hindsight is a bright light, and bright lights can flatten a room. You see what was missed, but not always what was visible then. You know what later technology could do, but not what earlier people could have predicted. You know which leads did not solve the case, but not which ones seemed urgent in the moment. We keep the light softer here. Soft light does not mean avoiding hard questions. It means asking them without pretending the answers are simple. Why did certain suspects remain uncharged? Why did some evidence not carry further? Why did tips fail to isolate the right person? Why did the confirmed series stop? These questions belong in the room, but they do not have to be shouted. The Oakland County Child Killer case also shows how a community's class and geography can complicate perception. Suburban places are often imagined as orderly, protective, and knowable. When a case like this enters them, the shock can make people search for explanations that preserve the idea of safety. A stranger, a network, a hidden house, a corrupt protection. Each theory tries to give form to disruption. Some theories may hold pieces of truth, others may be built from fear. Investigators had to sort that too. You can imagine them checking whether a suspect had ties to a wealthy family, whether influence affected access, whether a lead was ignored because of status, or whether the suspicion grew larger in the public mind because the status seemed suspicious by itself. Influence is difficult to investigate after the fact. If someone received special treatment, the traces may be subtle. A phone call not recorded. A search not pursued. But if no special treatment occurred, proving that absence is also hard. The Oakland County Child Files case lived with that ambiguity, especially around publicly debated suspects. Ambiguity can become a second mystery. It may attach itself to the first until people cannot easily separate them. Who committed the crimes? And did the investigation fail because of ordinary limits, or because something was protected? You can feel how those questions braid together, each tightening around the other, especially for families who have waited so long. A patient script does not cut that braid quickly. It lets you see the strands. Ordinary investigative limits were real. Public distrust was real. Family frustration was real. The absence of charges was real. The seriousness of some suspects was real. The lack of courtroom proof was also real. The case remains difficult because these realities coexist. In the task force years, investigators also had to face the possibility that the offender was watching coverage. That possibility changes strategy. Details released publicly might influence behavior, provoke communication, or cause evidence to be destroyed. Details withheld might preserve investigative advantage. You can imagine officials weighing a sentence before a press conference, aware that more than one audience is listening. The idea of an offender watching the news is unsettling, but we keep it calm. It is a tactical concern, not a theatrical one. Detectives had to assume that public information could reach anyone. They had to manage what was known widely and what remained inside the file. In a case so publicly feared, information itself became an object to protect. There were also letters and calls to consider in the broad history of the case, as there often are in major investigations. Some may have been hoaxes. Some may have been confused. Some may have been cruel. Each communication had to be evaluated. You can hear paper sliding from an envelope, smell the dry adhesive, and see an investigator study handwriting beneath a lamp. A hoax can be especially painful. It steals time from the investigation and pain from families. But investigators cannot dismiss a communication simply because it might be false. They have to compare details, postmarks, phrasing, and any private knowledge. The process is careful, quiet, and often disappointing. Another piece of paper enters the file, and the answer remains elsewhere. The Oakland County Child Killer investigation was also shaped by the physical climate of Michigan winters. Snow can preserve and obscure. Cold can change how people move. Early darkness changes visibility. Heavy coats and hats change descriptions. Tire tracks may matter, but weather can erase them. You can feel the cold air each time the file returns to February, December, January, and March. Weather is not background in a case file. It affects searches, witness memory, travel time, and physical evidence. A person walking in bitter cold notices different things than a person walking in summer. A driver's windows may fog. A pedestrian may keep their head down. A witness may hurry indoors. These small human reactions can decide what is seen and what is missed. Searchers in that weather did their work with cold hands and stiff clothing. You can hear boots pressing into snow, radios crackling, car doors closing heavily in the cold. Flashlights move along ditches, yards, wooded edges, and lots. Most searches end without discovery. The body tires. The hope tightens. Still, the next area must be checked. The confirmed children were eventually found, but the searches themselves remain part of the file's atmosphere. Search work is communal and lonely at once. Many people may gather, yet each person walks a small piece of ground alone with their thoughts. In the Oakland County Child Files case, those searches became part of the wider human effort, even when the answer did not come through them. When an investigation does not solve quickly, the community's help changes shape. At first, people call with immediate sightings. Then they call with suspicions. Later, they call with memories. Years later, they call with something they heard long ago, or something an aging relative said, or a name that has bothered them for decades. You can feel time changing the voice of the tip line. Late tips are delicate. They may contain valuable old truth. They may also contain memories reshaped by everything that came after. A person may genuinely believe they have remembered something new, but the memory may be mixed with news coverage, conversation, or dreams. Detectives listen anyway, because sometimes the old mind keeps a small fact carefully hidden until the right moment. In cold case work, listening is a tool. Not passive listening, but structured, patient listening. You let the person speak, you ask open questions, you avoid feeding details, You record the exact words, you compare them later. The Oakland County Child Killer file likely contains many such acts of listening, some fruitful, many not. All part of the long attempt, there is a gentle humility in listening to an old witness. They may be embarrassed by uncertainty. They may apologize for waiting. They may be afraid of being wrong. A good investigator makes room for that. You can imagine a phone call in a quiet office. A detective saying, "Tell me what you remember, and we'll take it one step at a time." One step at a time is how the case has had to continue. The answer did not arrive as a single revelation. It has not arrived yet in the form a courtroom would require. Instead, there have been steps, reviews, tests, disputes, and returns. You and I keep walking those steps because the topic is not only why the case went cold, but how people kept it from freezing completely. The distinction matters. A frozen case is one no one touches. A cold case can still be handled, warmed briefly by attention, cooled again by limits, then lifted once more. The Oakland County Child Files case has been lifted many times. Each lift leaves a trace, even when it does not leave a solution. Some of those traces are public: a news report about testing, a statement from officials, a family interview, a court filing. Others are private: a detective's note, a lab request, a comparison made and filed away, a conversation with a witness who asked not to be named. The public sees only parts of the work, and the unseen parts can become either reassurance or suspicion, depending on trust. Trust, again, returns like a recurring note. It is not an accessory to investigation. It shapes cooperation. Witnesses talk more freely when they trust. Families endure more patiently when they trust. Agencies share more easily when they trust one another. When trust weakens, the same evidence has to work harder, because people no longer accept the frame around it. The Oakland County Child Killer case strained trust because it remained unanswered for so long. Every year without charges gave room for doubt. Every disputed suspect widened that room. Every delayed record or unclear explanation made the room colder. You can understand this without deciding every suspicion is correct. Long uncertainty creates its own climate. Inside that climate, official language can feel inadequate. Words like active, ongoing, inconclusive, and insufficient are true, but they can sound empty to a family. They do not set a place at the table. They do not explain the missing years. Still, those words are often the only honest ones available to investigators who cannot prove more. You can sit with the inadequacy of honest words. That is part of this case. The truth may be that people worked, evidence remained, leads were followed, mistakes may have happened, and still no charge could be brought. That truth is unsatisfying. It does not close the file. It does not soothe the families. But not every true thing is soothing. The investigators themselves may have carried that inadequacy. A retired detective might know how much work was done and still feel the failure of the outcome. A prosecutor might know why charges could not stand and still understand why families wanted more. A lab analyst might know the limits of a sample and still wish it had yielded more. Everyone touches the same unfinished edge. Unfinished edges are common in old mysteries, but the Oakland County Child Files case has an especially heavy one because the victims were children and the setting was so ordinary. The case asks basic questions about safety, memory, institutions, and time. It asks how a community can know so much and still not know enough. It asks what patience can do when proof remains thin. Patience can preserve. It can re-examine. It can prevent false closure. It can keep names from fading. It can wait for better tools. It can listen when someone finally speaks. But patience cannot manufacture a fact. It cannot restore a lost object. It cannot bring back a witness who has died. This is the hard boundary patience keeps meeting. You and I meet that boundary gently as we read. We do not demand that the file become more complete than it is. We notice where it stops. We notice where later hands tried to extend it. We notice where science helped and where science could not. The lamp stays low and the pages turn without hurry. One of the quieter lessons of the case is that an investigation is also a system of care. Care for evidence. Care for witnesses. Care for families. Care for the accused because false accusation is its own harm. Care for public truth. When any part of that care weakens, the case suffers. When it holds, even an unsolved case can retain dignity. The Oakland County Child Killer investigation has been criticized, defended, reopened, retold, and questioned. It has moved through eras of policing, forensic science, media, and public expectation. Each era brought its own way of seeing. The 70s saw urgency and fear. Later decades saw archival review and suspicion. Modern years saw genetic possibilities and renewed family advocacy. The case did not simply remain in the past. It traveled. It traveled through paper, then photocopy, then digital scan. It traveled through police departments, courtrooms, newsrooms, and family homes. It traveled through the memories of people who were children then and adults later. You can feel that movement as the file grows thicker without becoming finished. A moving file can still be cold. That may seem contradictory, but it is true. Movement means activity. Coldness means no final answer. The Oakland County Child Files case has had both. It has known motion without resolution, effort without closure, and attention without certainty. That combination is what makes it so enduring and so difficult. As we stay with the investigators a little longer, we can see them not as a single group, but as a line of people across time. The first responders, the original detectives, the task force, the later reviewers, the cold case units, the analysts, the prosecutors, the records clerks. Each person received the file in a different condition and left it in another. The records clerks deserve a quiet place in the telling. They are not usually named, but they help keep old cases alive. A clerk who boxes reports carefully, labels evidence logs clearly, or retrieves a file without complaint is part of the chain of memory. You can hear the metal drawer slide open, the folder tabs clicking softly as a hand searches by name. Evidence technicians deserve the same quiet notice. Their work may be repetitive, but repetition protects the case. Seal, label, log, store. Later, retrieve, document, transfer, reseal. Each step may seem small, yet a missed step can weaken everything. In the Oakland County Child Killer file, any surviving evidence carries the history of those ordinary acts. Prosecutors, too, occupy a difficult place. They may review a suspect packet and conclude that the case cannot be charged, even if the suspect troubles them deeply. That decision can look like inaction from outside. Inside, it may be a recognition that a weak case could fail permanently. You can feel the weight of saying "not yet" or "not enough" when families are waiting. The phrase "not enough" is one of the saddest in law. It does not mean nothing happened. It does not mean no one cares. It means the proof does not meet the required standard. In the Oakland County Child Files case, not enough has hovered over many possible paths, leaving them visible but uncrossed. Defense of that standard matters, even here, especially here. The justice system cannot lower its burden because a case is painful. If it did, the wrong person could be convicted, and the real answer might remain hidden. This is another quiet discipline the file asks of us, to want justice without wanting it so badly that we accept a substitute. You can let that thought settle for a moment. The room is calm, the paper is still. Somewhere beyond the window, modern Oakland County roads carry modern cars past places that once belonged to the case's first days. The old file remains on the desk, asking for both urgency and restraint, two qualities that are hard to hold together. Holding them together may be the central work of the investigation now. Urgency. Because the families have waited long enough, and witnesses and evidence do not last forever. Restraint, because an answer must be true, provable, and fair. The Oakland County Child Killer case has suffered whenever those forces pulled too far apart. In the original years, urgency dominated because the danger felt immediate. In later years, restraint often dominated because the case had become legally and scientifically difficult. The best cold case work tries to bring them back into balance. It says, keep moving, but do not overreach. Look again, but do not invent. Listen, but verify. You can imagine a modern case review meeting built around that balance. A conference table, laptops open, old maps projected on a screen, evidence lists printed and marked. Someone reads the timeline aloud. Someone else notes which items have been tested, which could be retested, which witnesses remain living, which suspects are deceased, and which leads need one more careful look. The room would sound different from the 70s task force room. Fewer typewriters, more keyboards, less cigarette smoke, more clean office air, but some things would be the same. The fatigue in the shoulders, the attention to names, the feeling that a child's photograph changes the weight of every decision. The file still asks people to be careful. Carefulness can look slow. To the public, slowness can look like nothing. That misunderstanding has followed many cold cases, including this one. A lab request may take months. A records review may take years. A legal decision may require consultation across agencies. None of that produces daily news, but it may still be work. The Oakland County Child Files case went cold partly because the visible pace slowed, while the needed proof remained absent. The public saw fewer developments. Families felt fewer answers. Investigators may have continued in quieter ways, but quiet work does not always reassure people. Silence and secrecy can look alike from the outside, even when they are not the same. That is why communication matters so much in cold cases. Even when details cannot be shared, families need to know the file has not been forgotten. They need honesty about limits. They need respect for their knowledge. They need officials who can say, "We do not know," without sounding as if not knowing is acceptable. This is difficult, but necessary. In this case, communication has often been part of the wound. Some families felt excluded. Some officials felt constrained. Public disputes followed. You can feel the sadness of that, because everyone in the room was facing the same unanswered absence, yet the absence itself made cooperation harder. An unsolved case can divide the people most invested in solving it. The file sits between them. It is not loyal to one side. It holds what it holds: reports, dates, evidence, uncertainty. You place your hand near it and remember that the goal is not to win an argument about the past. The goal is to understand why the answer did not come and what patience still might do. From the investigator's side, the answer lies partly in standards and limits. From the family side, it lies partly in gaps and missed chances. From the public side, it lies partly in fear and memory. From the evidence side, it lies in silence, partial speech, and age. The Oakland County Child Killer case is cold because all of these sides meet without merging. As the night deepens in our quiet study, we can turn toward the evidence again, not to force it, but to see how physical traces, witness statements, and later tests kept offering small pieces that never quite became the whole.